To me, it seems, and of course, everyone's situation is different. But to me, it seems like there's a turning point right now, where maybe things are going to change or they're going to go forward. Um, and it's like a next step. And and sometimes those steps are marked by changes in us or changes in us that need to happen. And I was reading about Jacob, and the kind of message I'd heard about Jacob before. I started reading it. I'm not totally sure, that it was the right way to explain it, because the kind of message I've heard about Jacob before was, maybe you've heard similar, or maybe you've heard something very different. So I don't know, but what I'd heard was Jacob was a deceiver, and Jacob had a problem with deception, and then he deceived Esau. He deceived his father Isaac, and then he had to wrestle with God, and then he had to be cured of his deception before he met his brother again. And that's the kind of message I'd heard. I'm not sure if that's completely accurate. Um, it's more complicated than that. If you look at Romans, it says very clearly that even before the twins were born, God chose that the older would serve the younger. And so even if you look at if you just focus on Isaac saying, "Bring me something to eat," and then Rachel saying, "Go and do this," and telling Jacob to get dressed up like Esau and then put on this goat skin and pretend he's Esau. Just looking at that one thing, it might appear, oh yes, okay, Jacob deceived Isaac. Jacob is a deceiver, and that's how things happen the way they did. But that's not really a complete picture, because one is his mom told him to do this and he listened to his mom, and that's not a total excuse. But it was really his mom. But it wasn't just his mom. It was that even before that event happened, where Jacob took the blessing away from Esau, received the blessing, it was actually Esau who sold his birthright to Jacob for a pot of stew, or lentil soup or something. And so the blessing by Isaac of Jacob instead of Esau wasn't just due to Jacob's deception. It was due to the fact that Esau had already sold his birthright to Jacob in exchange for a bowl of stew. But even that, it wasn't even necessarily because of that. In Romans 9, it says that it was something that God had ordained beforehand, even before the children had done anything good or anything bad. God had decided, and I don't know how that works, but that's how it was decided. And even the name Jacob, as best I understand, it means in Hebrew something having to do with the heel of a person's foot, because when the twins were born, Esau came out, but Jacob was holding on to his brother's heel, almost like he was trying to be the first one out, maybe. And so their whole life, these were things that were going on. And so we don't really know um, what the truth of Jacob's character is. We know that he was meant to take the place of Esau. We know that he saw the opportunity, maybe it was God's will, to have Esau sell him his birthright for a bowl of stew, which he did. You could say that was wrong, but it was in the will of God. And then he deceived his father and pretended to be Esau. you could say that that was wrong, but that was also following the sale by Esau of that birthright. So Esau, it was really a consequence of Esau's action, and even that may have been following the will of God. So all of these things, we don't really have a clear explanation of all of Jacob's life, and there's no easy way to summarize him. But there is one thing that we do know is there was one night before Jacob met his brother Esau again, before he was going to meet the brother that he thought was going to destroy him, he had to wrestle with an angel. And the meaning of this wrestling is probably most relevant to all of us right now, because if we go to the next step in life that we're supposed to go to, and I think many of us don't go to the next step in life. And it's my, just as an observation, it's definitely partially wrong. It's only partially right, but it is an actual observation, is that it seems like most people don't go on to blessing in their lives. And the things that come to pass in their lives are less than the things that God wants to give them. And there's a reason for that. And it's because I think that we don't have victory in these certain issues in our lives that have been holding us back our entire lives. And without victory in those issues, we will not receive the blessing. And so it is centrally important to our life and to our relationship with God, whether we achieve victory in these issues that have probably been in our lives for a long time and that hold us back, and that before we go to this next step, we have to wrestle with God for that blessing. And in a sense, even though Jacob is wrestling with the angel, it's not that Jacob probably prevailed over God, in the sense, of course, he didn't overpower God, but it's that Jacob contended for the blessing, and he endured the struggle, and he came out of that struggle victorious. And each of us has a struggle in our lives right now that we've probably been struggling with for a long time, a personality trait, a temptation, a hurt, a regret, something in there that is essentially the thing that we have to face and win victory over in order for there to be blessing. And it is God's will that we contend for this, because that is one thing that can be said for Jacob, and that he valued the blessing and he fought for it. And if we value the blessing of God, then we will fight for it and we will do whatever is necessary in order to win victory over these issues in our lives. And so these issues in our lives, they're like Abraham said to the king of Egypt, "Oh, this woman is not my wife, she's my sister." And then did it again. Isaac did it also with King Abimelech. And so there's this repeated pattern of these same sins. Sometimes they come from our parents, sometimes they come from our upbringing, sometimes they come from events that happened to us when we were little, sometimes they come to us from something traumatic that occurred when we were older, a hurt or betrayal or anything like that. Whatever, they're very powerful events. But those events are meant to be seen by us the way God sees them, and then the way that they were seen by Joshua and Caleb, that those giants, they are our lunch. That problem is my lunch, and we're meant to contend with God, contend really essentially with ourselves, though, to defeat these problems. And this is what God really expects of us, and the rewards are so great. because if we get stopped on earth and we hit a wall and an ending point, and we basically don't grow beyond a certain point, then our relationship with God becomes stale. It becomes repetitive, and it actually will become fake, because by design, God has made us to grow. And once we stop growing, we stop knowing God, because God is perfect. And if we're going to know God, we have to be becoming perfect. And this is what First Peter says. First Peter 1:16 says, "Be holy because I am holy." And God is telling us, be holy because he's holy. To know God, we have to become more holy also. And he's made it possible for us. It's really our choice. And Matthew 5:48 says, "Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." And so if we stop short of victory over these issues, we're no longer on the road to knowing God. And it is not God's will for us to stop at any point and to have our growth ending. Um, we're at this hotel right now. We're staying um, at this place called Three Forks. It's where these rivers meet, and it's named after this Indian guide named Sacagawea, and she was the guide to Lewis and Clark. And Lewis and Clark, I like to study them because they went out from the east, and in the early 1800s, they explored the west, and they went out to these places that people had never gone before, and it was incredibly hard, and they're very courageous. Yes, Randia? Yeah? Well, okay, you're right. Brenya said that Native Americans were there already, but the people on the eastern side of the United States had not come out. And it was very brave for them to come out and to do what they did. It was not easy. Um, the future that is in front of us right now, it can be very, very different from what we know. It might be a lot more exciting and a lot more demanding and a lot more filled with God and God's presence than we've ever known before. And that's what lies before us. And that's why it's worth it for us to prevail, to win victory over our limiting issues so that we can go forward and we can know God in fullness and in His glory. And so that's that's maybe the victory that we need to overcome in order to receive the blessing of God, and that God intends for us to do it. So.